The year is 2000, and a naked guy on a beach is about to become the first survivor. This is also the year when Sony released the best-selling game system ever made. OutKast apologizes to Ms. Jackson a trillion times, and the X-Men save New York City in their big screen debut. But we're not here to find out what happens to a toad when it gets struck by lightning, because today we're counting down Electronic Gaming Monthly's best reviewed games of 2000. Well, it certainly is a big round room. If you've been wondering if the sports renaissance was just a fluke, then I'm here to tell you that it's here to stay. After years of sidelining most sports simulators to different parts of the magazine, Electronic Gaming Monthly has integrated them into the main reviews and let them compete with the likes of Zelda and Soul Calibur. As a result, we seem to see at least one sports sim find their way onto the list, usually in the 10th place position. That brings us to NHL 2001 on the PlayStation 2, which marks the first time a hockey game has skated its way onto one of these best reviewed lists. Electronic Arts once again raises the bar for console sports, explains Joe Funk. The player likenesses and stadiums are stunningly realistic, and the sounds give you a rink-side seat to a game that plays so real it's scary. Craig may not have given NHL 2001 a perfect 10, but he was still won over by the incredible presentation. This game looks great from start to finish and has everything that made the NHL series so great over the years. He also noted that although Madden might be the EA PlayStation 2 game that's getting the lion's share of the hype, I actually think that NHL 2001 has made the most impressive transition to the system, with an average score of 9.5 out of 10. That makes NHL 2001 the best reviewed PlayStation 2 game of 2000. NFL 2K1 is more than just a great Dreamcast game, it's also a nostalgic reminder of a time when there were multiple football games fighting it out for the same prize. After years of Electronic Arts dominating the space, Sega swooped in with a great-looking NFL game that managed to top the almighty Madden in pretty much every way possible. And not just this year, but all years. With an average of 9.7 out of 10, NFL 2K1 is EGM's highest rated traditional sports game by quite a large margin. Look, the 9th place ranking on this list doesn't accurately illustrate just how strong the scores were at the time. I caught some flack for only giving NFL 2K an 8.5, starts Dean Hager. I'll admit it was impressive, but overall it had room for improvement. Well, lo and behold, all the things I was concerned about have been polished up. Craig agreed, saying that it's amazing how Visual Concept seems to be able to keep pushing football games to the next level. This game is immeasurably better than its predecessor, and even tops the PlayStation 2 version of Madden 2000 in many ways. Everybody loved NFL 2K1, but it was Dan Leahy who ended up giving it a perfect 10. He loved the robust running game, the generous playbook, the high-speed action, and the online multiplayer mode. The only thing bad about this game is the time spent not playing it. With an average of 9.7 out of 10, NFL 2K1 ranks as the 9th best game of 2000. When we looked at the best reviewed games of 1999, Dan Shu confidently stated that The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX would probably be the best Game Boy Color has to offer for years to come. Little did he know, but Konami decided to take on that challenge and give us one of the best portable games of all time, Metal Gear Solid. Known in Japan as Ghost Babel, this stealth action game is not part of the proper Metal Gear canon. But that won't matter when Solid Snake comes out of retirement to infiltrate what used to be Outer Heaven in an effort to destroy a brand new mech codenamed Gander. This was the perfect appetizer while the EGM staff patiently waited for Metal Gear Solid 2, which was still about a year and a half away from release. Finally, a big league franchise on the Game Boy that's actually faithful to the namesake, explains Mark McDonald. It's like the old 8-bit Nintendo, and PlayStation Metal Gear games made sweet, sweet love, and then this was born. You know, that's actually an apt analogy, but I don't want to think about those two having sexy time, especially when it involves characters named Solid Snake and Big Boss. Greg also gave the game a perfect score, but highlighted an unfortunate typo. Metal Gear Solid on the MGS features all the tactical espionage action that made the PlayStation version a hit, plus a totally original story that's sure to please. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the initials he was looking for were GBC, not MGS. With a slightly lower score from Chris Johnston, Metal Gear Solid averages a sneaky 9.7 out of 10. So how do you follow up the biggest role-playing game of all time in a sequel that left many underwhelmed? Well, if you're Squaresoft, then you go back to basics and create a Final Fantasy sequel that plays homage to the classics that paved the way to the 32-bit era. The plan worked, and Final Fantasy IX managed to do the impossible. It outscored both Final Fantasy VII and VIII. This was a phenomenal sequel that showed Square at the top of their game and once again united the fan base. This is the best role-playing game I've played on the PlayStation, and the best in the series since Final Fantasy VI, gushes Greg. He liked that the summon spells were reduced, the characters were more interesting, and that the super deformed look lends itself well to the 8 and 16-bit feel of the game. Ryan was also happy to see Final Fantasy return to its roots, because we finally see castles again, flying ships made out of wood, white and black magic, the feeling of medieval-themed adventure, all the things that made Final Fantasy such an unforgettable experience years ago are back. Milkman echoed those thoughts, adding that Final Fantasy IX is the highest caliber, technically and emotionally, and I wish that there were more of its kind. With all three editors loving it, this final 32-bit Final Fantasy game averaged a score of 9.7 out of 10, making it EGM's second highest rated role-playing game of all time. What's the first, you may ask? Well, you'll find out in just a few moments. I think it's fair to say that Electronic Gaming Monthly has a complicated history with Resident Evil. It named the PlayStation original the fourth best game of 1996, and then immediately put the director's cut on the worst reviewed list. When Resident Evil 2 came around, the review crew gushed over the sequel, while simultaneously trashing the original. And then there's Resident Evil 3, which averaged a score of 8.6, well out of contention for last year's top 10 list. Now comes Resident Evil Code Veronica, and it seems the first and only Dreamcast installment is a return to form for the franchise. When I first heard about this game, I figured it would be a cookie-cutter survival horror title thrown together just so there's a Resident Evil game on the Dreamcast, confesses Chris. Nothing could be further from the truth. An excellent storyline, ambient music, and a lot of genuine jump-out-of-your-seat moments make this not only a great game, but the best in the series thus far. Crispin wasn't ready to go that far, noting that despite some lovey-dovey sappiness, the plot is pure dynamite, and the overall adventure runs longer than past RE games. His major complaint involved one of the puzzles, which he described as being too tricky and that you'll run into key points where you're up crap creek. Lovey-dovey romance stuff aside, Resident Evil Code Veronica scares up a terrifying 9.7 out of 10. "2000 was the year of the franchise. So far, this list has consisted entirely of sequels and yearly sports updates, and here's a spoiler warning because that describes the rest of the chart too. In fact, of the 10 games that make up this best reviewed list, Perfect Dark is the only original IP. Sure, you could argue that this rare first-person shooter is a spiritual successor to GoldenEye 007, but Joanna Dark is a brand new character set in a wholly unique sci-fi world. Look, it's the closest thing we have to an original game this year, at least when it comes to this list. The surprising thing isn't that Mark gave this Nintendo 64 game a perfect score, but rather that he wasn't a huge fan of Rare's last release. As someone who thought that GoldenEye was overrated and a big fan of PC first-person shooters, I was extremely skeptical of Perfect Dark. But once I tried it, I was hooked. Crispin also gave Joanna a perfect score, but was quick to note that the game has problems. Perfect Dark is not perfect. Choppy frame rates plague the more ambitious multiplayer modes, but you know what? You'll still want to spend months locked in a room with this masterpiece. Craig agreed about the frame rate, concluding that it's just one of Rare's trademarks that you have to get used to. With nearly everybody in full agreement, Perfect Dark earns an incredible 9.8 out of 10. Before Final Fantasy VII hit the scene in 1997, Chrono Trigger was the best reviewed role-playing game of all time. Since then, however, we've seen both Cloud and Squall steal the spotlight and redefine what gamers expect from an RPG. After 5 long years, it's time for the time-traveling franchise to regain its footing and brush the competition to the side. And that's exactly what happened in 2000, when Chrono Cross managed to outscore Final Fantasy IX by a single fraction of a point. Sure, it's not a resounding victory, but it's a good enough score to not only make it the number 4 game on this list, but also become EGM's highest ranked role-playing game of all time. Yes, I barely played the original Chrono Trigger, and yes, I'm ashamed. But the fact is that you don't need it in order to fully enjoy Chrono Cross, Mark sheepishly explains. There just isn't a weak link to this game. Graphically, no game looks like it, not only in every location, character, and monster lovingly rendered and expertly textured, but the whole game has a bright, colorful style that makes me notice how drab and cold even some of my favorite RPGs have been. Greg, on the other hand, worried that Square might be its own worst enemy. As it stands, this is one RPG that could steal Final Fantasy IX's thunder later this year. Chrono Cross is a masterpiece, plain and simple. Even Sam, who was an ardent fan of the original, loved the game, but wasn't ready to put it above Chrono Trigger. With the help of his perfect score, Chrono Cross averages an insane 9.8 out of 10, topping the original's 9.25 and the 9.7 that we just saw from Final Fantasy IX. Well, I guess Greg was right after all. We've already talked in this series about the rarity of a perfect 10 average. Individual editors would give 10s here and there, but it wasn't until Metal Gear Solid that the entire review crew came together to give a unanimous perfect score. Well, whether you like it or not, that seems to have opened up the floodgates, and here we are talking about the 4th game to accomplish that feat. What's more, Gran Turismo 2 is one of 3 games that earned a 10 out of 10 average in 2000, which is easily the most we've seen in a single year. Look, that's not to say that Gran Turismo 2 isn't a great sequel that deserves the high scores, but am I the only one who misses the days when EGM would cling to those perfect marks like they were the only lifesaver on the Titanic? Polyphony Digital never ceases to amaze me, starts Chi. Gran Turismo 2 is perfection all over again. I don't know how to thank them enough. He did complain that it has a couple of bugs here and there, but the realism and sure joy of driving and modding your own car remains unsurpassed. Despite having the long review, John was at a loss for words. I pondered what I was going to say in this review for a long time. Originally, I was toying with the idea of just saying wow and leaving the rest of the space blank. I also toyed with posing the question, can we give a game an 11? Yeah, I think that perfectly sums up where Electronic Gaming Monthly was in 2000, for better or worse. With all 4 editors giving the game perfect scores, Gran Turismo 2 is the 4th game to average a score of 10 out of 10. The original Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was a blueprint for how every developer should make an extreme sports game. But despite being immensely influential, it was also an imperfect experiment that needed a little fine-tuning to be perfect. It averaged a score of 8.4 out of 10 from EGM, which may sound good, but actually ranks it around 54th place. Thankfully, Activision listened to the criticism, and I think it's safe to say that Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 is one of the best sequels of all time. In fact, the EGM editors were so impressed by this upgrade that they gave it a perfect 10 out of 10, a feat only accomplished by 4 other games at the time. Many times sequels are botched by overly ambitious developers, explains Dean with a rather shaky premise. That's not the case here. All the stuff they've added is really useful, namely Create a Skater, the manual trick, and the track editor. Greg also loved Neversoft's sequel. There are some really sick combos possible in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. Some of the guys around here can string together tricks like nobody's business. Awarding it the Game of the Month, Crispin announces that all developers working on Tony Hawk's Pro Skater clones come out with your hands up. He loved the game so much that he wasn't sure if it could even be topped. We'll see how that goes in a future episode, but for now, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 averages a perfect 10 out of 10. If you were one of the vocal Zelda fans who was outraged when Soul Calibur beat Ocarina of Time in a tiebreaker round, then prepare to enjoy the sweet taste of revenge. EGM gave 3 different games a perfect 10 average in 2000, but it was Majora's Mask that ended up taking the top prize. This was a departure for Nintendo in the usual Zelda formula, and not every fan was on board with the new direction. This was a divisive installment that is still hotly debated online to this day. So to see all 3 editors not only agree, but give it unanimous perfect scores is an unexpected surprise, to say the least. I love the time travel aspect of Majora's Mask, even more so than Ocarina of Time in some ways, starts Greg. Besides the novel approach, what you really get in Majora's Mask is more of the same great gameplay from the last game, complete with an entirely new, though eerily familiar, world to explore and a unique set of quests and mini-games. Playing Ocarina of Time was such a wonderful experience, I was utterly convinced that nothing would be able to top it for many, many years. Okay, I was wrong, but at least it was another Zelda game that smashed my prediction, so I don't feel as bad. Even Mark was quick to call Majora's Mask better than Ocarina of Time, praising the mobility, save functionality, and incredible dungeon designs. With all 3 editors giving it perfect scores, this Zelda follow-up averages an incredible 10 out of 10. Now, if you're wondering how The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask was able to beat out sequels to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and Gran Turismo, then I'm here to tell you that it's all because of the top 100 games of all time list from Electronic Gaming Monthly that was published in 2001. Believe it or not, the magazine ranked Majora's Mask as the 7th best game of all time, only 1 spot higher than Ocarina of Time. More importantly, that placement was significantly better than Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, which landed at number 17. Now when it comes to Gran Turismo, EGM opted to go with the 3rd installment and not the 2nd, which was named the 15th best game ever made. No matter what, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask managed to beat them all, which is why it finds itself as Electronic Gaming Monthly's best reviewed game of 2000. Take that, Hawkman. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Electronic Gaming Monthly's Best Reviewed Games. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we're going to be counting down EGM's worst reviewed games on Friday. And here's the question I have for you. What is your favorite game of 2000? As always, it doesn't have to be one of the games on this list, so let me see your picks in the comments below. On another note, I want to apologize if my voice was a little bit more hoarse than normal. Actually, a lot more hoarse than normal. It just couldn't be helped. Hopefully that won't be the case going forward. Also, we have reviews of Rift Keeper and Vampire the Masquerade going up. So do me a favor and click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.